My name is Elisa Carpio, and I'm a tech evangelist as well as innovation catalyst at Intuit, based in San Diego.
And I'm Sonia Meikpatlan. I'm a software developer and also an innovation catalyst based out of Edmonton, Canada.
Innovation Catalyst is a role that many of us play at Intuit. We are coaches in design thinking, specifically Design for Delight, or D4D, and we'll go more into that. So let's go ahead and get started. Screen. So here's what we'll cover today, a case for change. We'll go over what is design thinking, and then we'll deep dive into Intuit's design thinking methodology called Design for Delight, or D4D. We will then connect that with SDLC, which is Software Delivery Lifecycle, the Agile methodology of SCRUM, and D4D together. We'll walk through a sample use case, and then we'll end with the goodie bag and key takeaways. So many of you, or maybe some of you, can relate to these quotes. I'm a back-end engineer. Why do I need to know and practice design thinking? Our product manager is the one who tells us about the customer and the problem that they're having. Do I need to know anything else? And finally, design thinking is for designers, right? But I'm an engineer. In reality, design thinking actually started in engineering, and I learned that from Jeff Zayas at Intuit, who said, gosh, Elisa, a lot of people think that design thinking is just for designers, but really, as technologists and as engineers, we need to understand our customer, and we need to really use these principles. So design thinking is an iterative process and a way to solve problems through experimentation and learning from your customer. And this, according to the Interaction Design Foundation, also is about questioning the assumptions and really thinking about how do you learn quickly and iterate quickly so that you can keep going and in terms of solving those problems. At Intuit, design thinking is called Design for Delight, or D4D. And there are 3 principles. And again, I'm going to say those are principles and not a linear process. The first is deep customer empathy. Go broad to go narrow, and the last is called rapid experimentation, or experiments with customers. Deep customer empathy is about really learning from the customer, understanding who they are, what is important to them, and what is their pain and the problem that they're experiencing. And that's all through insight and as well as observation. Go broad to go narrow is really about focusing on what is truly critical. But in order to focus to the one, you must go broad and have as many ideas and as many ways of solving that problem before you actually narrow. Rapid experiments with customers is really about before you code, before you sit down and just go into that zone of coding, you really need to think about how do you create cheap experiments to learn from customers? How do you test your assumptions? Let me just take a moment in terms of Design for Delight. Again, going back to the fact that this is about problem solving. And what we're trying to do at Intuit is really create customer-obsessed technologists. And so Design for Delight is customer-obsessed problem solving. And I'm highlighting Deepan Mehta here. I have a video, but we're not going to share it today. He is a senior software engineer on machine, and he learned about Design for Delight when he was an intern at Intuit. Now, 5 years later, he is still coaching other engineers on the importance of understanding your customer before you actually start coding, understanding that problem statement and writing that down. And we'll go more into problem statement when Sonia goes through the use case. Now, we keep talking about the customer, and I want to take a moment to define who that is and maybe redefine for many of you who that is. Who's actually going to consume your work? Who's actually going to use the widget, the plugin, or the feature that you created? For many of us, the user is the end customer who consumes the product or pays for your app. But also for many of us, especially those that are creating widgets and plugins and services, it's most likely another engineer or someone in product development, or maybe someone like in the business side, maybe someone in finance that needs help with a service. Now, in all of these, there is a customer, whether it's internal or external, and there might be more than one. And one of the things that we suggest, who is your primary customer? Who is the most urgent? Who is the most urgent need? You can have a secondary or tertiary customer as well, but who are you going to prioritize for? Now, if you have more than one primary customer, most likely your problem is too broad and you'll need to narrow on the problem. And then finally, on that second bullet, if there isn't a customer and a pain and an opportunity you're solving for, most likely no one's going to need your work. or no one's going to need that widget that you're creating. So think about it. So how does design thinking, or D4D, actually relate to SDLC as well as Agile? So before we actually put them all together, I want to go over the 3 components that we're going to be sharing. The first is in number 1, you guys have seen this, I'm sure, SDLC. So software delivery lifecycle starts off with planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing, and then maintenance. Number 2 here is a visual for Scrum, an Agile methodology, and we do Scrum it into it, and we sprint every 2 weeks, sometimes 4. And so it starts off just like SDLC with scoping the work, planning, designing, implementation, testing, and then release. And then the third component here is what we just went over. It's the 3 principles of design for delight, which is deep customer empathy, go broad to go narrow, and then rapid experiments. So how does this all work across? So let's put it together. Up on the very top is SDLC. And so that's where you would see, planning, design, implementation, and maintenance. Down on the bottom of this timeline where it says Agile Team Charter, that's actually, an Agile framework, and that's Scrum. So it starts off with scoping, PBL grooming, design, sprint planning, obviously execution. You'll have your daily Scrum there, sprint retro, and sprint demo. And what you'll see under each one of these is the 3 principles of customer empathy, experimentation, and going broad to go narrow. So for example, in scoping, we are suggesting that this is the time when you want to go broad and think about what is it that we're really going to do? What is it that we're really going to need to understand so that we can go into PBL or backlog grooming properly? Now in design, again, this isn't about just for designers. In design, for all of us, you're going to want to think about who is the customer, what is the problem. You might have to really brainstorm here in terms of before you actually design the solution or experiment. And you'll want to think about what are the cheap experiments that you could run with your customers in mind. And then as you can see here, even in sprint demo, we want to go back to our customer and really kind of think about what is it that we just released that really is going to make a difference for our customers and really solving that problem and providing that benefit to them. So let's go ahead and put this to practice, and I'm going to go and have Sonia take it over from here.
All right, so we just said that D4D is a customer-obsessed problem-solving tool. And in order to solve a problem, you have to have a problem. And what we're using is a very simple form, which is called a problem statement that you fill out. And then you have a guideline on what to solve. And the most important thing, and that's the customer-obsessed part, is you don't solve a problem for yourself. It's a problem from your customer. So you have to put yourselves in your customer's shoes. And it's 5 parts. It's I am, narrow definition of the customer, what they're trying to do, what gets in their way, the root cause of that, and the emotion, very important. So you get to feel their pain. And in this case, let's say you are a developer on a front-end plugin, and your task is to refactor that plugin. So who do you work for? In this case, actually, the people who are going to consume your work are actually your team members, so your colleagues, which is great because you're very close to them and you probably know their pain too. So let's say the problem statement is, I am a front-end engineer at Intuit working on a plugin for one of our product functionalities. I am trying to modernize UI to have consistent design elements across the whole product. That's a narrow definition of the problem there. But they can't use the standard UI components that would simplify the implementation. And then the root cause, because the tech stack is too old and not compatible with the new UI components we're supposed to use. So classical tech problem, I think you know that, which makes me feel slow, frustrated, and exhausted. So next step, now you have to find the problem. And then imagine you have all the resources in the world, all the compute in the world. Imagine your ideal state, and this is really where you want to go. This should be borderline impossible. In this case, it's in a perfect world, all of our plugins can easily use the latest UI components without worrying about compatibility issues. The biggest benefit is that you can focus on improving the product instead of just trying it to make work with old tech, which makes you feel happy and efficient and on top of your work. So you have the problem and you have the ideal state where you want to go. So let's go into the SDLC. So usually start off with scoping and planning. In a sprint, you would start with backlog grooming, and in D4D, this is the part where you work with your customer, right? You have to know what their customers are doing, and if you work for the end customer, you can go and listen to customer calls, read interviews, or do interviews yourselves, read transcripts, or just get the feedback. In our case, let's go directly to the team. Let's just do a brainstorming exercise with the team, and super simple, just everyone takes stickies and presents their solutions, put them up on a board, and then you vote. And of course, you can do this offline with real stickies, but there's a lot of tools online now that you can use. For example, we're using Mural quite often, which also has a nice voting tool. So you could use that, for example. So you said, okay, our goal is to take a dedicated month to refactor the whole plugin and not do anything else, not rewrite it, but refactor it. Let's go into the next step, the analysis. So usually this is where you break down and prioritize the work in the backlog. And what we do is we're going broad to go narrow here. We're using a narrowing method called 2x2, and you can see on the picture on the right how our team is using that. And how the 2x2 works is really you have two axes. And you have two labels, and the top right is the most important one. And my favorite one of these is the Eisenhower method, where the labels are urgent and important, and you put all the tasks on the axis, and the more urgent they are, the more they go on top, and the more important they are, they go on the right, and you focus on the top right corner. And if there's too many stickies, take off everything else, top right corner, and put them on the board again. Again, going broad to go narrow. And then in this case, it said most important task to sketch new architecture, which is great because this step is design. And usually you would say design, okay, that's fast prototyping and all that. And then you can go to the customer, get your verification if this is the right way to go. But for us engineers, we don't really create the UI, but what we do is we create architecture diagrams. So let's say you want to refactor your plugin. So sketch out the architecture. Then go to your colleagues and say like, hey, this is how I would refactor it. What do you say? Get the feedback from the customer, and then you can improve the structure and reiterate. Go narrow on the biggest problem. And then you select where you want to start, and then the implementation starts. So normal daily Scrum, you have your sprint work. And again, you can use all the principles that we talked about just yet. So when you do grooming, go broad to go narrow. And if at the end of the sprint, when you get to the feedback, go back to your customers and make sure that you're still on track, that you're still solving the right thing. And the next thing is testing and implementation. And we as developers would say like, awesome, yeah, we're doing unit tests, 100% test coverage. We're good, that's great. But there is one important thing here. You shouldn't just make sure that your function gives the right output, that it works with this API and all that, but just what is your default use case? What is the problem you're solving for? And just test against it. So just take a moment to sketch down the steps for your default use case and then see how does your solution perform against that. Is there a way to optimize the flow? Is there a way to improve the flow through itself? And then get feedback from the customer, of course, and then iterate again. So it's really just iteration and getting feedback constantly. So let's say 1 month is over, you have released your new plugin. Yay, everyone's happy, awesome. Of course, you still have to maintain it, have to fix the last remaining bugs. But the most important thing that you have to do here is go back to your customer, present them your final solution. And there's two things that can happen, and both are actually great. So the first one is the customer says like, yeah, that's not what I wanted. This is totally not the solution to my problem. And this is super important to know, because just imagine if you didn't know that, just imagine your solution was out there 1 month, 2 months, a year, no one's using it. And you don't even know why, because you never asked anyone. So if you get direct feedback right away, you can say, okay, let's circle back, let's pivot, we have to work on this again. And the other thing that can happen is that the customer says, wow, that's awesome, thanks so much. And this is so great for your daily work because it really gives you great feedback and great value for your work. So little story here. So what we did once as engineers, we went into our customer voice tickets where people, you know, yell at you in all caps, hey, this little thing is not working and I hate it and this bug is so horrible. And the engineer, actually, we had one who went in and said like, okay, I can fix this in, I don't know, 30 minutes. They fixed it, they released it, and then they actually wrote the customer and said like, hey, the problem that you had last week, I fixed it. And there were some stories there where customers were so grateful for this and for the quick answer and fixes. And this is so validating for your work. This is so delighting. And so in our case, where we say our customers are the plugin team, the easiest feedback you can get from them is during a sprint retrospective. So what we usually use is some form of retro tool. You can use Fun Retro or whatever you like. And so everyone just puts in what went well, what didn't go well, and the action items. And again, this is direct customer feedback. And you can go broad and collect all the feedback, and then you go narrow. What do we have to do better? And of course, if you did go through prototypes that you tested, then you can iterate through these tools and say like, okay, this is what we have to focus on next sprint. And from that, I'm going to give it back to Alisa.
Thank you. So we are going to wrap things up with what we're calling the goodie bag, which is takeaways, and make this, we'll share with you a link at the end where you can just quickly download from SlideShare these slides. But what we'd love for you to do is be able to bring some of these things back to your team. So we're giving you 3 things in your goodie bag. The first is the D4D, deep customer empathy, go broad to go narrow, and rapid experiment with customers. So we're going to summary that you can use. Second is we went ahead and created a table, a couple of slides with the table that summarizes all the things that Sonia just went over that relates SDLC, SCRUM, and D4D together. And then finally, we created our amazing designer, Abby, created a brand that you can share with others these skills. So here's the first thing that you all are going to get. Again, these are the 3 principles. When you are, really trying to understand your customer, one of the first things that you should ask is, what is the customer problem? When you go broad to go narrow, you're going to want to consider many ideas before you narrow. And this is when you want to ask, how might we solve this problem? And then the third, around rapid experiments or experimentation with customers, this is when you want to ask, how might we test our hypothesis or solution before we actually code it? These next 2 slides, it's just, again, the summary of what Sonia just went over end to end with the use case that she shared on the front end engineer. And as you can see, we went ahead and put all 3 side by side just to give you some pointers on what you do at each stage of this process. And then finally, here's the Zoom background that you all can use. Please go ahead and share this as well. And then finally, here's the link to our slides. This will take you to SlideShare. So we've got a bit.ly link, but let me go ahead and end the show because we to answer questions. Wow, Sonia, we have like 6 minutes. Sonia, do you want to go ahead and see if we have any questions?
I'll just give you folks a couple of minutes. So we have 6 minutes for questions, so you can post your questions in the chat. And we will, copy paste the link in the chat. That's actually a good idea.
Okay, let me go ahead and do that.
Yeah, we can do that. Lisa's going to do that for you. And yeah, the presentation will also be shared out on the website of Developer Week a little after the conference.
Thanks, Justine, for letting us know. Amazon already does this. Yes, many companies already do it. I also definitely had a chance to be a part of one of IBM's version of design thinking. Every company has one, but one of the things that we wanted to share with you all is this methodology. Super easy to actually do this in your everyday. So thank you. Sonia, do we have any questions? I know we prepared a couple just in case.
Did you paste the link here? I didn't see it yet.
I did. I did it on the event. Oops.
Oh.
Okay. Sorry, I'm learning this tool. So here you go.
Okay, so we have a question, which is, how do you start this on a mostly hardware company?
Yes, it doesn't matter whether you're hardware or software, and I can start, and then Sonia, please do add. One of the first things, even in hardware, is that you are still going through some sort of a process of obviously scoping, planning, designing, implementation, as well as support. And one of the first things that I always say is the baby step is start with the problem statement. Start with actually understanding what are you trying to solve for. And if you can just start there, and then go into like, brainstorming, how might we solve this? You're already at the beginnings of D4D or design thinking. Sonia, would you add anything else?
Nothing to add here. We have another question. That is, how was your experience with rapid experiment steps and final customers?
Sonia, do you want to take that one?
Yes. So, I mean, you never have a fully finished product. Like there's no perfect product out there in the world, right? So this is why we at Intuit do constant feature development. So I'm working in QuickBooks, and we constantly think like, okay, what can we improve? And every time you want to improve something, you have to sketch out how you want to improve it, right? And so you can take a final area of the product and you can say, okay, let's iterate on that. What happens if we change the button here? Like it can even be small things, right? And then you can go and experiment on that one.
I do want to add that there's some things that I've done in the past, which is co-designing with what we would consider, I guess, your final customer, the customer that we really are trying to solve for, or your primary customer. And when you co-design, you actually, would work with maybe 1 to 5 to 10 customers. And through the life cycle of, when you release, you're working with those same customers, iterating with them, they're co-designing with you side by side. And then at the end, they're kind of almost like your beta testers at the end, but really at the end, you're both releasing the solution together. So that's another methodology, and that's called co-designing.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. Next one is, I find prototyping very useful during iterative design, especially potential high-risk areas. I would be interested in your thoughts on prototyping.
Do you want to start that one, Sonia? And then I'll add my poison cookies one after.
Yes, prototyping, I mean, you can do prototyping in many forms, right? So like we said, like prototyping could really be, if you create code, you create an architecture diagram, you can create very fast prototypes where you just sketch out things. What we also sometimes do is a prototype of just the technical implementation. So you make sure that the technical piece works and then you iterate. So yes, do prototype often. Get feedback on that, and then iterate. So because it's so important that you do this early on in the process, because this makes you realize if you go wrong, and you can pivot on that, instead of like just building the solution end to end completely, and then you release it and realize, oh my God, this is totally wrong. We have to go over that again.
So pre-COVID days, prototyping had a lot of these stickies that, when we would work side by side. Now with COVID days, I use, I know you mentioned Mural and other tools like that. I even use Google Docs just for prototyping on Google Sheets with my team and with partners. I do want to share something on prototyping. A lot of people always ask me, how many people do you really need to talk to or share your prototype or cheap experiment before you can say it's good enough? I love what Tom, and it's called the poison cookie example, which is really, if you were to put out a plate of cookies that have something in them, like maybe poison, how many people would need to eat that for you to start seeing that directionally there's something wrong? You don't need many. I always kind of say to people, 3 to 5 would probably give you some sort of a direction in terms of as you're testing and prototyping. We have 1 minute. What's the last question?
We have 2 questions actually. So one is major challenge in blockchain adoption is the creation of customer-centric software. How can we get more designers into open source?
Oh gosh, that is like the biggest, that is actually a really good problem. You should start with a problem statement of what is keeping them from being part of open source. So that's what I would say. Sonia, would you say anything else on that one? That one's a big one.
Yeah, this is difficult. I would just, yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. Like, this is a big one. I would definitely start with the problem of what is keeping them from being part of open source.
Yeah, I mean, this is
understanding
really,
your customer.
Yeah, this is customer empathy too, right? Like in this case, your designer is your customer. So Talk to them, ask them, try to figure out
I
what
love
is
that Giuseppe is saying.
create a problem statement for that. You can actually use D4D for solving for things like that.
Thank you. I love that Giuseppe is saying you need a full conference for that question.
Yeah. Okay.
I know.
I think we're at time.
We're at time.
Yeah, if you have more questions, just hit us up, write us a message, and we're happy to answer.
Yes, we're both on LinkedIn, so please do check us out and let's connect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.